What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars steps into a daytime television studio, expecting a warm welcome, only to be blindsided by an attack that strips away the carefully controlled mask he's worn for decades? This isn't just another talk show interview. What you're about to hear is one of the most explosive confrontations in the history of live television, where composure cracked, tempers flared, and the world saw a side of Tom Cruise they never expected. The day began like any other promotional tour stop. Tom Cruise, the action hero whose name alone could sell out theaters, had been booked on The View. It was supposed to be simple. A little banter about his daring stunts, a behind-the-scenes story or two, and plenty of laughs for the morning audience, sipping coffee at home. But the atmosphere in the studio that morning was different. You could feel it in the air, tense, heavy, almost electric. Something was about to happen, and Cruise, despite his charm, had no idea what was coming. He walked onto the set with that signature smile, the kind that had melted hearts for decades. The audience erupted in applause. He waved, shook hands with the co-hosts, and settled into the guest chair. On the surface, it looked like every other interview he had ever done. But the small smirk on Joy Behar's face should have been his first warning. The other co-hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Sunny Hostin, were unusually quiet, exchanging glances that suggested they knew something he didn't. "Tom, welcome back to The View," Whoopi began warmly, her voice steady, her professional mask firmly in place. "We're so excited to have you here to talk about your new film." "Thank you for having me," Cruise replied, his energy infectious as always. "I'm thrilled to be here. This movie has been such an incredible journey, and I can't wait to share it with everyone." The audience cheered. For a moment, it felt safe, familiar. But before he could continue, Joy Behar leaned forward, her tone slicing through the pleasantries like a knife. "Tom," she interrupted, "before we get to your little action movie, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Your personal beliefs and how they affect your career choices." The studio fell into silence. Even the audience seemed to sense the shift. Cruise's smile faltered, just for a second, before he composed himself again. He wasn't a stranger to tough questions. But something in Joy's delivery told him this wasn't going to be a normal exchange. "I'm sorry, Joy," he said carefully, "but I'm here to talk about the film. My personal beliefs are exactly that, personal." Joy leaned back in her chair, a satisfied expression on her face. She had drawn blood, and she knew it. "Oh, come on, Tom," she pressed, her voice carrying just the right amount of mockery. "You're a public figure. You make millions because people pay to see you. Don't you think they have a right to know what kind of person they're supporting?" Cruise's jaw tightened slightly. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge creeping in. "I think people have a right to be entertained. That's what I've dedicated my career to, bringing stories to life that inspire and entertain audiences around the world." Whoopi tried to step in, sensing the danger. "Joy, maybe we should focus on the movie first, and then—" But Joy wasn't letting go.
"No, Whoopi.
I think this is exactly what we should be talking about." Tom has been avoiding real questions for years, hiding behind publicity machines and carefully crafted interviews. Well, this isn't one of those interviews. The camera caught Cruise's hands gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening. He looked directly at Joy. "With all due respect, Joy, I've never hidden from anything. I've been open about my life, my work, my dedication to my craft. What exactly are you trying to get at here?" Joy's eyes lit up with something that looked almost like glee. "What I'm getting at, Tom, is that you use your platform to promote ideas that many people find dangerous and irresponsible. And yet you expect us to just ignore that and focus on your little stunts and explosions." "My little stunts," Cruise repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Those little stunts employ thousands of people. They create jobs for stunt coordinators, camera crews, sound technicians. Those little stunts generate hundreds of millions of dollars that fund other films, other stories, other dreams." Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wishing she could vanish. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to speak but held back, her eyes darting nervously between Joy and Tom. Joy waved her hand dismissively.
"Please.
Spare me the economics lesson." We both know that's not what this is about. This is about you using your fame and influence to legitimize fringe beliefs that harm real people. The murmurs from the audience grew louder now, some shifting uncomfortably, others whispering to each other. The tension was suffocating. Fringe beliefs. Cruz repeated, his voice dropping into something far more dangerous. Joy, you're making accusations without any basis. I've never forced my beliefs on anyone. I've never used my platform to hurt people. In fact, I've done the opposite. I've dedicated my career to bringing joy and excitement to millions around the world. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned forward, refusing to back down. And that's exactly the problem. You have all this influence, all this power, and you use it irresponsibly.
People look up to you, Tom.
Young people. Impressionable people. And what kind of example are you setting? The air in the studio was like a powder keg waiting to ignite. Whoopi tried again, her voice urgent. Joy, maybe we should let him finish. But Cruz cut her off, his intensity now fully focused on his accuser. No, Whoopi. I want to hear exactly what Joy is accusing me of. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like I was invited here under false pretenses. You asked me here to promote a film, and instead, I'm being ambushed by someone's personal agenda. The cameras zoomed in. The audience held their breath. And Joy Behar, smirking in her chair, prepared to deliver her next strike. And this was only the beginning. The tension inside the studio was unbearable now. Viewers at home might have thought the feed was slowing down, the silence stretching far too long between sentences, but no, it was real. Every second felt heavy. Every glance carried weight. And right there in the center of it, Tom Cruise leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked onto Joy Behar, his carefully rehearsed charm stripped away. Joy smiled like a chess player who knew she had her opponent cornered. You want specifics, Tom?
Fine.
Let's talk about your history. Let's talk about the interviews you've walked out of, the journalists you've shut down, the moments when the mask slipped. People say you don't just believe strongly in your worldview. You weaponize it. You turn it into a shield whenever someone challenges you. Cruz's mouth twitched, the faintest flicker of a smirk, though there was no humor in it. He took a breath before answering, each word measured. What I weaponize, Joy, is hard work, dedication, commitment. People can call me intense, obsessive, even difficult, but they can never say, I don't give everything to my craft. To my audience. To the people who trust me to deliver. But Joy wasn't backing down. Her voice grew sharper, each sentence cutting deeper. That's not what people remember, Tom. They remember the outbursts. They remember the times you attack someone for asking the wrong question. They remember the couch jumping, the rants, the headlines that turned you from Hollywood's golden boy into late-night comedy material. The crowd shifted uneasily, caught between admiration for the star and discomfort at the rawness spilling out on live television. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, visibly uncomfortable, muttering under her breath, Lord have mercy, this is getting out of hand. Cruz's voice grew stronger now, his tone less defensive and more commanding. You want to talk about moments? Let's talk about context. Because what the world saw were headlines. Clips taken out of full conversations. Do you think any of that told the whole story? Do you think the world got the truth? Or do you think they got what the media wanted them to see? The audience erupted in murmurs, some nodding, some frowning. It was a rare moment of transparency, a crack in the polished surface. And Joy, perhaps sensing that she was losing control of the narrative, leaned in further, eyes gleaming. Tom, don't stand here and act like you're the victim of the press. You've played the game. You've lived in the spotlight. And now, when someone challenges you, you cry foul? That's not courage. That's cowardice. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Cowardice. For a moment, Cruz didn't move. His jaw clenched, his breathing steady, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, closing the gap between them, his voice low but powerful enough to silence the room. You want to call me a coward?
Fine.
But let me tell you something, Joy. Every stunt I've done, every bone I've broken, every risk I've taken, it wasn't because I had to. It was because I refused to ask someone else to do what I wouldn't. I've hung off planes, scaled skyscrapers, driven cars through fire, and pushed myself to limits most people can't imagine. That isn't cowardice. That's commitment. That's accountability. And that's why people trust me to deliver every time. The room was silent now. You could hear the faint hum of the studio lights above. Even Joy seemed momentarily stunned, her lips parting as if she had lost her line of attack. But Tom wasn't done. His voice rose, fueled by a fire that had clearly been building for years. And while you sit here, behind this desk, throwing accusations like stones from the safety of your chair, I'm out there, putting myself on the line. Not just for me, but for the thousands of people who depend on these films to put food on the table. So don't you dare call me a coward. The audience erupted into applause, a sudden, thunderous release of all the tension that had built up. Some stood to their feet, cheering. Others clapped hesitantly, unsure if they were supporting Cruz's defense or just trying to break the unbearable pressure of the moment. Joy Behar, unfazed by the cheers, raised her hand to quiet the room. You're a great actor, Tom. No one's denying that. But being a great actor doesn't excuse the damage your influence has caused. You think stunts and box office numbers are proof of character? They're not. They're distractions. And the people at home, many of them, are starting to see through it. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed whispers Cruz had likely heard for years. And yet, instead of retreating, he leaned in even further, his eyes blazing. You think you know me, Joy? You think you've got me figured out because you've read a few articles and watched a few clips? You don't know the sacrifices. You don't know the sleepless nights, the pressure, the weight of carrying an entire production on your back. You don't know the burden of being expected to be perfect every single day, knowing one mistake becomes a headline.
You don't know me.
The studio audience was silent again, hanging on every word. Even Sarah and Sunny, who had been quiet through most of this, were leaning forward now, their eyes wide, caught up in the storm unraveling before them. And then Joy smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly one, but the smile of someone who knew they had lit a fuse. You're right, Tom, she said softly. I don't know you. None of us really do. Because you've spent your entire career making sure the world only sees what you want them to see. And today, the mask is slipping. Her words sliced through the room, leaving a chill in their wake. For the first time, Cruz's composure wavered. His hands clenched tighter. His shoulders tensed. And at that very moment, the studio producers, panicking behind the cameras, flashed a signal. Cut to commercial. But the damage had been done. The world had already seen the cracks. When they returned from the break, the interview wasn't the same. The energy had shifted. Cruz, still simmering, tried to steer the conversation back to the film, but the co-hosts, emboldened by Joy's confrontation, weren't letting him off the hook so easily. Questions sharpened. Tone hardened. And the audience at home? They weren't watching a promo anymore. They were watching a battle. And for Tom Cruise, the battle had only just begun. When the cameras came back from commercial, the set of The View no longer felt like a daytime talk show. It felt like an arena. The audience, once clapping politely and smiling for the cameras, now leaned forward in their seats, buzzing with the anticipation of a fight they knew wasn't finished. Tom Cruise adjusted his jacket, trying to reassemble the calm, professional image he had perfected over decades. He forced a smile, thanking the audience again, trying to pivot back to safer ground. This movie, he began, his voice smooth but strained, has been one of the most exciting projects I've ever worked on. The team behind it. But before he could finish, Joy Behar leaned forward again, refusing to give him even a breath of safety. Her tone was almost playful, but her words were barbed. Oh, come on, Tom. You can recite the press tour script anywhere. What our audience wants to hear is the truth. Not the polished version. Not the PR-approved story. The real Tom Cruise. The studio fell quiet. You could hear nervous laughter ripple through a few rows of the audience, but it faded quickly. This was no longer entertainment. This was confrontation. Cruz's smile thinned. His eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice stayed calm. The truth, Joy, is that I've spent over 30 years entertaining people. 30 years of giving everything I have, body, mind, and soul, to a craft I love. That's the truth. And it's right there in every film, in every performance, for the world to see. But Joy wasn't finished. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her smirk daring him to continue. That's one truth, Tom. But there are others. Like the way you've used your fame to promote beliefs most professionals in the mental health field consider harmful. You can dodge the question, but it won't change the facts. The atmosphere was suffocating now. Sunny Hostin shifted uneasily, glancing between her co-hosts, clearly debating whether to intervene. Sarah Haynes opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure. Even Whoopi, usually the anchor of the show, stared down at her hands, letting the clash play out. Cruz's tone dropped, slower now, each word sharp. Joy, what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's an ambush. You invited me here under the pretense of talking about a film. You knew exactly what you were doing. And you think by repeating the same accusations others have made, you're somehow revealing something new. But all you're doing is proving you don't care about conversation. You care about spectacle. A murmur ran through the crowd. The word spectacle hit hard because that was exactly what this moment had become. People weren't watching an interview anymore. They were watching a battle of wills, live and unscripted. Joy, refusing to lose ground, leaned in again. You call it spectacle. I call it accountability. And if you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be here. And that was it. The trigger. Cruz's composure cracked, not in a wild outburst, but in a controlled explosion of intensity. He sat forward, his voice rising, each word echoing off the studio walls. Tough questions? Joy, you haven't asked a single question today. You've made accusations. You've tried to box me into your narrative. But you haven't asked me one honest, thoughtful question about who I am or what I do. And you want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about yours. The audience gasped. It was a reversal no one saw coming. Cruz's intensity filled the space, his eyes never leaving Joy's. You sit here, day after day, passing judgment on people who come on this show. You make snap judgments, throw out accusations, and when someone pushes back, you hide behind the word accountability. But where's your accountability? Who holds you responsible when you twist a narrative, when you reduce someone's life to a soundbite, when you decide your opinion is more important than the truth? Joy's smirk faltered, just slightly. It was the first crack in her armor, but Tom wasn't letting up. Do you know what real accountability looks like? It's waking up every morning and knowing that hundreds of people's jobs depend on you showing up, prepared, ready to work harder than anyone else. It's putting your life on the line doing stunts that no insurance company wants to touch because you know the audience deserves authenticity. It's giving decades of your life to an art form that's bigger than you. That's accountability, Joy. And I've lived it every single day. The crowd erupted into applause again, louder this time. It wasn't polite. It was raw, emotional. People were standing, clapping, cheering. The cameras cut to the audience, faces lit up with shock, excitement, and awe. But Joy Behar, never one to be outshined, fired back, her voice louder now, trying to cut through the noise. That's not accountability, Tom. That's ego. That's you trying to control the narrative. The truth is, you've avoided answering real questions for years. And today, you're doing the same thing. You hide behind your work, your stunts, your fame, but when it comes to taking responsibility for the influence you have, you deflect. Every single time. The applause faded, replaced by a heavy silence. Cruz's expression hardened, his voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper. You want to talk about influence? Let me tell you something about influence. Influence is giving a kid hope when he doesn't think he has any. Influence is making a movie that inspires someone to chase their dreams, to believe in something bigger than themselves. Influence is using your platform to fund literacy programs, to support disaster relief, to give scholarships to kids who never thought they'd see the inside of a college classroom. That's influence. That's what I've done. But you don't want to talk about that, do you? Because it doesn't fit your narrative. Joy blinked, caught off guard. For a moment, she had no comeback. And Tom seized the silence. His voice rose again, his intensity surging like a wave. You sit there, pointing fingers, demanding accountability. But what have you built, Joy? What have you created? What legacy will you leave behind other than tearing people down on national television? You call this accountability. I call it destruction. The audience roared again, this time split, half applauding Cruz's defense, half gasping at the sheer force of his words. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. Sunny Hostin whispered something to Whoopi, who shook her head, eyes wide. For the first time in her career, Joy Behar looked rattled. Her smirk was gone, replaced with a flush of frustration, maybe even embarrassment. But instead of retreating, she doubled down, her voice sharp and defensive. You think yelling at me proves anything? You think intensity equals truth? Let me tell you something, Tom. Respect is earned. And right now, in this chair, on this stage, you haven't earned mine. The words hit like a punch.
Respect.
Cruz leaned back slightly, his chest rising and falling, his eyes locked on hers. His voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that carried more weight than shouting ever could. I haven't earned respect? Joy, I've spent 30 years earning the respect of audiences, of directors, of crews, of the people who work alongside me. I've earned the respect of those who know what it means to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. But you're right about one thing. I don't need your respect. The silence that followed was suffocating. The silence that gripped the studio was unlike anything daytime television had ever seen. Millions of viewers sat at home, holding their breath, staring at the screen as though they were witnessing something forbidden, something raw and unrehearsed. Joy Behar's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the producers, as if silently begging for backup, for someone to steer the show back to safer waters. But no one intervened. The cameras were rolling, and the nation was watching. Tom Cruise leaned back slowly in his chair, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. Not the polished, practiced Hollywood smile. Not the charming grin audiences had memorized over decades of red carpets. No, this was different. This was the smile of a man who had faced the fire and refused to burn. The other co-hosts remained silent. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably, her usually commanding presence muted. Sunny Hostin bit her lip, eyes darting between Joy and Tom. Sarah Haynes sat frozen, hands clasped in her lap, as if afraid that even a movement might shatter the fragile stillness in the room. Finally, Joy spoke. Her voice was quieter now, lacking its usual bite. You're good, Tom. Really good. I'll give you that. But this doesn't change anything. People will make up their own minds. They'll decide whether to believe the image you sell, or the cracks they see. It was meant to be a jab, one final strike, but it landed weakly. And Tom knew it. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze unflinching. You're right, Joy. People will make up their own minds. And that's the beauty of it. They don't need you, or me, to tell them what to think. They'll decide for themselves. And when they look at me, they'll see someone who never stopped giving everything he had. They'll see the truth, whether you like it or not. The words hung in the air, steady and resolute. The audience clapped, some hesitantly at first, then louder, stronger, until the studio filled with applause. It wasn't the frenzied roar from earlier. It was something deeper, respectful, almost cathartic. Joy's expression hardened again, but her silence betrayed her. She had lost control of the moment, and she knew it. The producers, desperate to regain order, cued Whoopi, who finally spoke, her voice low and steady. All right, let's take a breath here. This was supposed to be about your new film, Tom. And, well, I think we've gone a little deeper than we planned. Laughter trickled awkwardly through the crowd. It wasn't genuine humor. It was relief, the kind of nervous laughter that comes when tension finally begins to crack. Tom chuckled softly, shaking his head. That's all right, Whoopi. Sometimes the truth finds its way into the room, whether you plan for it or not. The segment limped on, the questions now lighter, safer. Sarah asked about the stunts in his latest film. Sonny inquired about his training regimen. Whoopi joked about whether he was finally ready to slow down. Cruise answered them all smoothly, his composure regained, his tone charming once more. But everyone in the room knew the real show had already happened. The fireworks were over, but the smoke still lingered. When the cameras finally cut and the studio lights dimmed, the audience erupted into chatter, buzzing about what they had just witnessed. Some applauded Cruise, praising his passion, his defense, his refusal to back down. Others shook their heads, siding with Joy, convinced his performance was just that, a performance. Backstage, producers huddled nervously, already fielding calls from network executives. The clip would go viral. They knew it. They didn't just have a segment anymore, they had a cultural moment. And Tom Cruise? He walked out of the studio with his head high, his stride steady, his jaw set. The battle had taken its toll, but he had stood his ground. That night, the exchange dominated headlines. Clips circulated across social media, dissected frame by frame, word by word. Commentators debated who had won. Some praised Joy Behar for holding Cruise accountable, for refusing to let him slip past uncomfortable questions. Others hailed Cruise as a warrior, a man who refused to be cornered, who pushed back against what he framed as media ambush. On late-night shows, comedians replayed the most explosive moments, adding punchlines, turning the confrontation into satire. On podcasts, analysts dove deep into Cruise's words, his tone, his body language, his strategy. Was it genuine passion, or was it another performance? The debate raged on. But behind the noise, behind the memes and headlines, something undeniable lingered. The world had seen a side of Tom Cruise it hadn't seen before. Unfiltered, defiant, vulnerable, yet unbroken. And that was the paradox. The mask had slipped, as Joy had said, but instead of weakness, many saw strength. Instead of cracks, they saw fire. Weeks later, when Cruise's new film premiered, the box office numbers shattered expectations. Crowds poured into theaters, some drawn by the spectacle of the movie itself, others curious after the infamous interview. The controversy hadn't destroyed him, it had fueled him. As for Joy Behar, she too found herself at the center of conversation. Some praised her courage for standing her ground against one of Hollywood's most powerful figures. Others accused her of overstepping, of turning a promotional interview into a personal attack. Her legacy, too, had been reshaped in that single hour of television. But in the end, the moment belonged to both of them. A clash of personalities, a collision of narratives, a reminder of how fragile the line between performance and reality truly is. And perhaps that was the lesson buried beneath the shouting and applause, that in a world where image is everything, the truth is never clean. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. It's raw. And sometimes, it reveals itself not in polished speeches, but in the unguarded sparks of conflict. Tom Cruise knew it. Joy Behar knew it. And now, so did everyone who had been watching. The interview would be remembered not as a conversation, but as a battle. Not as promotion, but as revelation. And for Tom Cruise, walking away from that stage, one thought burned brighter than the rest. He had not been silenced. And for a man who had built his life on being seen, being heard, and being believed, that was victory enough.